right, here's part 2, chapter 4. It took an hour, perhaps 2. He could not measure time yet and didn't care for the sun to get halfway up. With it came some warmth, small bits of it at first, and when the heat came, clouds of insects, thick swarming hordes of mosquitoes that flocked to his body, made a living coat of his exposed skin, clogged his nostrils when he inhaled, poured into his mouth when he opened to take a breath. It was not possibly believable. Not this. He had come through the crash, but the insects were not possible. He coughed them up, spat them out, sneezed them out, closed his eyes and kept brushing his face, slapping and crushing them by the dozens, by the hundreds. But as soon as he cleared the place, as soon as he killed them, more came. Thick, whining, buzzing masses of them. Mosquitoes and some small black flies that he had never seen before. All biting, chewing, taking from him. In moments his eyes were swollen shut and his face was puffy and round to match his battered forehead. He pulled the torn pieces of the windbreaker over his head and tried to shelter in it, but the jacket was full of rips and it didn't work. In desperation, he pulled his t-shirt up to cover his face, but that exposed the skin on his lower back, and the mosquitoes and flies attacked the new soft flesh of his back so viciously that he pulled his shirt down. In the end, he sat with his windbreaker pulled up, brushed with his hands, and took it, almost crying in frustration and agony. There was nothing left to do, and when the sun was fully up and heating him directly, bringing steam off of his wet clothes and bathing him with warmth, the mosquitoes and flies disappeared. Almost that suddenly. 1 minute he was sitting in the middle of a swarm, the next they were gone and the sun was on him. Vampires, he thought. Apparently they didn't like the deep of night, perhaps because it was too cool, and they couldn't take the direct sunlight. But the gray time in the morning when it began to get warm and before the sun was full and hot, he couldn't believe them. Never in all of his reading in the movies had he watched on television about the outdoors. Never once had he ever mentioned the mosquitoes or flies. All they ever showed was the naturalist shows was beautiful scenery or animals jumping around, having a good time. Nobody ever mentioned mosquitoes and flies. Ugh. He pulled himself up to stand against the tree and stretched, bringing new aches and pains. His back muscles must have been hurt as well. They almost seemed to tear when he stretched. And while the pain in his forehead seemed to be abating somewhat, just trying to stand made him weak enough to nearly collapse. The backs of his hands were poofy and his eyes were almost swollen shut from the mosquitoes, and he saw everything through a narrow squint. Not that there was much to see, he thought. Scratching the bites in front of him lay the lake, blue and deep. He had sudden picture of a plane sunk in the lake, down in the blue, with the pilot's body still strapped in the seat, his hair waving. He shook his head. More pain. That wasn't something to think about. He looked at his surroundings again. The lake stretched out slightly below him. He was at the base of the L, looking up the long part with the short part out to the right. In the morning light and calm, the water was absolutely perfectly still. He could see the reflections of the trees at the other end of the lake. Upside down in the water, they seemed almost like another forest. An upside-down forest to match the real one. As he watched a large bird, he thought it looked like a crow, but it seemed larger. Flew from the top, real forest, and the reflection bird matched it, both flying out over the water. Everything was green, so green it went into him. The forest was largely made up of pines and spruce, with stands of some low brush smearing here and there in the thick grass, and some kind of small brush all over. He couldn't identify most of it, except the evergreens, and some leafy trees he thought might be aspen. He'd seen pictures of aspens and mountains on the television. The country around the lake was moderately hilly, but the hills were small, almost hummocks, and there were a few rocks except to his left. There lay a craggy ridge overlooking the lake, about 20 feet high. If the plane had come down a little to the left, it would have hit the rocks and never made the lake. he would have been smashed, destroyed. The word came. I would have been destroyed and torn and smashed, driven into the rocks and destroyed. Luck, he thought. I have luck. I had good luck there, but he knew that was wrong. If he had good luck, his parents wouldn't have been divorced because of the secret, and he wouldn't be flying with a pilot who had a heart attack, and he couldn't be here, or he wouldn't be here if he had had good luck to keep from being destroyed. If you keep walking back from good luck, he thought, you'll come to bad luck. He shook his head, wincing. Another thing not to think about. The rocky ridge was rounded and seemed to be part of some kind of sandstone with bits of darker stone layered and stuck inside it. Directly across from the lake, or from it, at the inside corner of the L, was a mound of sticks and mud rising up out of the water, a good 8 to 10 feet. At first, Brian couldn't place it, but knew that somehow what it was. He had seen it on films. Then a small brown head popped to the surface of the water near the mound and began swimming off down the short leg of the L, leaving a V of ripples behind, and he remembered where he had seen it. It was a beaver house, called a Beaver Lodge, in a special he'd seen on the public channel. A fish jumped. Not a large fish, but it made a big splash near the beaver, as if it was a signal to suddenly little splats all over the sides of the lake, along the shore, as fish began jumping. Hundreds of them, jumping and slapping the water. Brian watched them for a time, still in a half daze, still not thinking well. The scenery was very pretty, he thought, and there were new things to look at, but it was all green and blue blur that he had used the gray, and he was used to the gray and the black of the city. Traffic, people talking, sounds all the time, the hum and the whine of the city. Here at first it was silent, or he thought it was silent, but when he started to listen, really listen, he heard thousands of things, hisses and blurks, small sounds, birds singing, hum of insects, splashes from fish jumping. There was great noise here, but a noise he did not know. The colors were new to him, and the colors and the noise mixed in his mind to make a green-blue blur he could hear. Hear as hissing pulse sound, and he was still tired, so awfully tired, and standing had taken a lot of energy somehow, had drained him. He supposed he was still in some kind of shock from the crash, and there was still pain, the dizziness, the strange feeling. He found another tree, a tall pine tree with no branches until the top, and sat with his back against it, looking down at the lake with the sun warming him. And in a few moments, he scrunched down and fell asleep again. All right, that's another chapter. I hope you guys are doing well. I'll record another one tomorrow. Bye.